It's a bonus episode kind of day. It is a prospect profile kind of day. Today, we are talking about what the Blue Jackets could do with their second first-round pick in the upcoming draft and whether it could be a WHL prospect. We're talking to Hadi Kalakeche today all about Brayden Yager on Locked on Blue Jackets.
You're Locked on Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked on Blue Jackets, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to bring you news, stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked on Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms. I am over on YouTube. You can find us there. Hit subscribe and get notified when new episodes go live. Today, we've already talked a little bit about tonight's upcoming game, but we also have a prospect profile for you. So I sat down with Hadi Kalakeche. He works with Dobber Prospect. He works with Habs Eyes on the Prize and also Locked on NHL Prospect. So he's a guy that really knows his stuff about prospects. And we talked to him last week about Oliver Moore. Today we're talking to him about Brayden Yager, a WHL prospect currently playing for the Moose Jaw Warriors. The Blue Jackets obviously have had some success with players from Moose Jaw in the last draft. So we're talking about things like chemistry. We're talking about his strengths, his weaknesses, when he's going to be NHL ready, where he could fit into this lineup. So I'm just going to get right into it because Hadi says it much more smartly than I can. The Blue Jackets had success drafting from the Moose Jaw Warriors last year. They picked Denton Mateychuk with their 14th overall pick, I believe, or their 12th or 14th. I can never remember. I feel like it was probably 12th. But I want to talk about a different center, and I want to talk about Brayden Yager, who is a name that I feel like is getting kind of more and more hype, I guess, as the year goes on. So what can you tell me about Brayden Yager as a player?
Well, it's so funny that you say that because he's kind of waned on me. At the start of the year, I saw him as kind of a top 5, top 6 contender, a guy who's among the best in this draft class because, the goal scoring ability was there. He's got an NHL size, really, really solid on his feet, and he's able to, find space really effortlessly in the offensive zone. But the issue was I didn't really see much outside of that. And then he added some playmaking, and I was like, wow, okay, we've got a great goal scorer with decent playmaking. That's great. But the more I started to watch his game, the less I saw kind of the hints of processing and intelligence that I like to see from centers. He's also not the most defensively reliable. He's decent enough in his own zone that he's able to keep up with top sixes in the WHL, but I don't know if that's going to translate properly, if he's going to be able to stack his skills in order to make that work. But the main issue with Yager is skating. And usually when skating is the only issue a prospect has, I'm not too concerned because we've got the improvements in skating have gotten so much more streamlined. Like teams are a lot more better equipped to solve skating issues. But with Yager, it's not the only issue. If you had if he was a Zach Benson type, Zach Benson is extremely intelligent. He's one of the most intelligent prospects in the class. And he also has a terrible skating form. He concerns me a lot less. That's why I've got Benson 5th overall, and I've got Yager in the kind of the 15 to 20 range, is because Benson has so much intelligence that if you fix his skating, his brain's keeping up. I don't know if Yager, if you fix his skating, his brain's going to be able to keep up with his feet. He plays at the pace that he skates, and he's skating too slow. That's the concern for me. But with a player with that much skill, a player who's able to shoot the lights out, a player who's able to find a stick through a sea of skates like he does. I mean, yes, he plays on a very solid offensive team in Moose Jaw, a team that scores a lot of goals, but at the same time, he's at the center of a lot of those goals. So I think that the connection with Moose Jaw is kind of going to entice the Blue Jackets to go that route if he's available by then, because I think teams are still high on him. A lot more than the public scouting sphere is. But if he is available in that range, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see the Jackets go for him. They've probably seen a lot of him in the last year. So, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'm always so interested to know how much kind of chemistry has an impact on like
Mhm.
like drafting players. So like
Yeah.
for example, I was talking to Tony Ferrari, I believe it was, about if you take Adam Fantilli second and then Gavin Brindley is available at kind of 16 to 20, do you take him because those two have really connected? Do you
Mhm.
take a player that you're familiar with because you've seen a guy that, like you say, like, so they've probably watched a lot of Denton Mateychuk this
Mhm.
year, trying to figure out whether he's going to make the jump to the pro level next year.
Mhm.
Do you think that has like a massive impact, or do you think it's kind of, I guess, recency bias is the term I'm looking for?
I don't think the chemistry is really the main thing there. I think it still has some sort of impact because they're telling themselves, this is a guy that Denton knows well, and we want Denton in the team and all that, and this might entice him to stay longer, not request a trade, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the main thing with that is viewership bias. It's just the amount of times you see a player. There's a lot of times where I've made this mistake before. I kind of still make it sometimes. I'll see a player 10, 15 times and be convinced of, what I see and rank him below a player who I've seen 5 or 6 times. It turns out that the guy who I've seen 5 or 6 times is head and shoulders above the player that I've seen 10 or 15 times in every area, every element. Just I haven't seen enough games and I haven't gotten accustomed to his style of play enough to be able to have a solid opinion on this. So I think that's the thing that kind of happens with teams is they've watched, for example, with the Blue Jackets, they'll have watched the Montreal Warriors maybe 20, 25 times. They'll have sent their scouts out to watch Denton Mateychuk and scout Brayden Yager. So they'll say, we have a lot of a better idea who Brayden Yager is versus who, for example, Gavin Brindley is, because we've watched him maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times. So we'll go for the guy we know better. That's kind of the logic that goes behind it. And it can be detrimental. It can definitely be an issue. I think of the Habs with their picks last year with Uri Slafkovsky and Philip Machar as their first 2 picks in the draft. Those guys were best friends growing up. They knew each other very well. They played on the same national team at every stage. They've probably seen both of them a lot, having wanted to scout Uri Slafkovsky so much. So they went, we'll go with the guy we know that well. There were probably 4 or 5 or 6 guys that were drafted right after Philip Meshar, who I would have taken before him. Yuri Kulich is doing amazing this year in the AHL. Jagger Firkus is just, he's taken another level offensively. He's a guy I've constantly talked about as one of the best WHL prospects in recent years. So, it's the kind of thing where it's important to take into consideration that seeing a player too much is possible. That, watching a player to a point where you're kind of blinding yourself to other prospects is an issue. But I don't think that this is something that happens often enough that it's a problem. It's happened a couple times. I've seen it happen a couple times, with NHL teams. But I'm just saying, if the Blue Jackets, have Brayden Yager available at, let's say, 17, 18, I'm not against them picking him. He's not a guy I'd drop out of my first round entirely. The skill level is definitely there. And processing's tough to learn, but I've seen it improve in some players. So, you can't rule him out. But, he's a guy that I wouldn't be surprised to see be gone by pick 10. A lot of teams are high on him.
In a minute, I've got a little bit more of my conversation with Hadi about, like I said, about chemistry, about weak spots, about draft position, all that kind of thing, all with regards to Brayden Yager. But first, I've got to tell you all about FanDuel because it's the number one sports book in America. The tournament is heating up. That is March Madness. There's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel. Right now, they're giving new customers a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That is up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Just go to fanduel.com/locked on and sign up today to claim your no sweat first bet. You can wager on everything from the money line to point spreads to which team is going to win March Madness. They're down to the final 4, so your odds are pretty good in picking a winner there. All in an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. So don't miss your shot at a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to fanduel.com/locked on to sign up. Make every moment more with FanDuel. Yeah. He again is a player that's kind of listed as a center on Elite Prospects. Do you see him as an NHL center, or again, is he a guy whose game, like, it's tough to say, obviously, because he has so much work to do in terms of his skating and stuff, but
Yeah.
say he fixes the skating, say he manages to adjust his gameplay to the new skating. Is that a game that can be played at center in the NHL?
Yeah, I mean, you've got a player who's got such a great shot and such great playmaking that you're able to build around that and make him sort of decent enough in transition. The things that he does well with the puck when it comes to shooting and playmaking, it's misdirection, it's uh, give and goes, playing into space, stuff like that. These are things that can translate to a good transition game. And if I'm an NHL coach, I want my centers transitioning. I want them stooping low, helping their defensemen with a breakout lane, and then skating the puck out. So if you're a team that wants that from your centers, you can build Brayden Yager into that kind of prototype. But like you said, there's a lot of work that goes into that. The processing and skating need to come up 2-3 levels before I'd consider him kind of a lock at center. I think that he'll default as a winger if that doesn't work out. If he's not able to build up that skating and processing to a level that he's comfortable enough with such little space around him, playing in open ice with 4, 5, 6 players, circling around him. If he's not able to get comfortable with that, I think he'll default as a forechecking winger because his physical skills are decent. He's got a lot of weight to put on. He's listed as 165 pounds right now, but the mechanics are good. He gets low. He uses his core, cuts off opponents' hands in war battles. So that's one thing I could see him kind of defaulting as is maybe a third, fourth line forechecking winger.
Yeah, that was going to kind of be my follow-up question is
Yeah.
where do you think kind of his ceiling is in terms of he's probably not going to be that number one center that the Blue
Yeah.
Jackets need, but does he top out at, being a strong middle six center, or is he a bottom six center that could maybe be a middle six winger type thing? Where do you think his ceiling is?
I'd say that the best outcome with Jaeger, if he does fix his skating and processing, is as a goal scoring second line center. A guy who's going to get you 30, sometimes even 35, 40 goals a year. Um, while, manning on a good team as a second line center, that's the best outcome for him. Kind of like a kind of a Steven Stamkos light, not the 60 goal scorer type, but, at his best, I think he'll score 30, 35 goals and, provide a decent amount of assist play most of his time on the half wall in the power play and just wire in slap shots and one timers, that kind of thing. The odds of that are pretty slim in my opinion. I know a lot of teams are higher on him and see that first line upside. I don't. But yeah, he's someone who, in an ideal world, if everything goes well, could become a goal scoring second line center.
Well, it feels like the Blue Jackets are probably going to pick up their first line center a little bit earlier in the draft if they manage to stay in the top 3. I feel like one of Bedard, Fantilli, or Carlson is probably that number one center
Hopefully.
of the future. So if they manage to get, 1 and 2 out of this draft and end up with, let's say Bedard and then a guy like Yager with the 18th, 19th overall pick, like that feels like a pretty successful first round in my opinion.
100%. If you got your 1C and your 2C in the same draft, you're set for, the next 15, 20 years. Absolutely. That's great.
Yeah. Like it's weird. I feel like the Blue Jackets have had so many first round picks over the past 2 seasons. So if they include these 2 that we're going to have in the upcoming draft, they'll have had 7 first round picks over the last 3 drafts, which feels bonkers. And it feels like they're all going to hit at roughly the same time. Like Cole Sillinger's just obviously taken a step back. Ken Johnson, I feel like he's this close to just completely popping off. Kuhlmans has made it to the AHL. David Jiricek is having a phenomenal season in the AHL as an 18-year-old. It's if they manage to add a guy like Yager after already adding one of Bedard, Fantilli, or Carlson, like
the Blue Jackets are scary.
Really
they're scary. Like the amount of high end prospects that they've added in the last couple of years. I just think of like a Denton Mateychuk, David Jiricek pairing as your first pair.
What I want. That's what I deserve. After this season of random defensemen, I deserve Mateychuk.
With God forbid Connor Bedard taking her passes and heading into the offensive zone, it's just terrifying. If I'm honest, the Blue Jackets in a couple of years, give them 4 or 5 years, it could be a really scary team. Yeah,
it's kind of on the precipice of being a really fun time to be a Blue Jackets fan. Like the season has been rough.
Just on the break.
And, as a Habs fan, you probably feel the same way. Last season plus this season, it's been a long time for Habs fans. But the thought of what the Blue Jackets are going to look like in 2-3 years is what keeps you going. And if they add a guy like Yager to that, then great. If they add a guy like Oliver Moore to that, who we talked about last episode, it could
it could be a real fun time in
100%.
Columbus.
Yep.
And that's all I've got for today. Tomorrow, we're going to break down tonight's game against the New York Rangers. Hopefully, it's not as much of a bloodbath as I am anticipating, but there's just no way to know that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making this your first listen of the day every day. Locked On Blue Jackets continues to be free and available on all podcast platforms. We are over on YouTube. If you haven't hit the subscribe button over there, please feel free to do so. It helps me out. It helps you out. If you hit the bell button underneath this video, then you will get notified when new episodes go live. You don't have to sit around and wait for them. Well, you do, but then you will know as soon as they're up, as opposed to just having to come across them on YouTube. And thank you for listening. Thank you for making us your first listen. I appreciate you. I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the podcast at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. And until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.